10 empires that came close to world domination. Number 10. The Spanish Empire, 1402 to 1975 CE. The Spanish Empire was so big, it was called the empire on which the sun never sets, because it was always daytime somewhere in the empire. It endured for 573 years, stretching from Italy to the Indies, owning 9% of the globe. And of course it was the Queen of Spain who sent Christopher Columbus to discover the Americas. In 1580 it merged with the Portuguese Empire. This extended their control over most of South and Central America, as well as vast swathes of Southern Africa. But the Spanish didn't run their empire sustainably. They enslaved the Amerindians of South America, who died in droves from bad treatment and European diseases like smallpox. When the 50 million natives were reduced to nearly 1 million, the empire began the transatlantic slave trade. The empire shrank as the Portuguese Empire broke away. The Napoleonic Wars ravaged its army and navy, and it gradually lost its hold in the New World to numerous rebellions and the USA. Today, Spanish is the second most spoken language in the world, with 470 million native speakers. Number 9. The Ottoman Empire, 1299 to 1922 CE. The Ottoman Empire grew from Asia Minor to conquer southeastern Europe, parts of Western Asia, and North Africa. Ultimately, 3% of the world's population fell under Ottoman rule. The Ottomans pioneered new gunpowder weapons to defeat their enemies, which turned out to be extremely useful. In 1453, they brought the Byzantine Empire to an end when they conquered Constantinople, which became the new capital of Istanbul. Europeans felt so threatened by the Islamic Empire that they waged constant war on the borders just to keep the Ottomans at bay. The empire lasted an incredible 623 years, but by the end, it was jokingly called the sick man of Europe. A long period of peace meant they fell behind the military development of their rivals. Britain and France took their African lands, so the Sultans allied with Germany to stay in the game. This dragged them into the wrong side of World War I, and they lost everything to Britain and France. Then the Turkish War of Independence led to the creation of the Republic of Turkey. Number 8. The Qing Dynasty, 1644 to 1912 CE. The Qing Dynasty reigned for 268 years. They conquered and established modern China, creating such a stable peace that their population boomed to several hundred million people. At its peak, the Qing Dynasty ruled a quarter of the world's population. It was so powerful, even the British Empire paid tribute. The Qing emperors kept their people in line with torture and execution, but the real key to their success was their economy. They exported silk, porcelain, and tea to the rest of the world and had no need to import anything. They formed tributary relationships with their neighbours who relied on friendly trade with the Qing dynasty. It effectively ruled all of South Asia. The Qings never invaded Europe because the emperors were more interested in maintaining stability in their own empire than in conquering the world. Unfortunately for them, the regime became horribly corrupt in the early 19th century, leading to a series of rebellions and civil wars. Western powers like Britain, France, and the USA took control of Beijing for a time, and the dynasty grew weaker. It eventually became the Republic of China in 1912. Number 7. French Colonial Empire, 1534 to 1980 CE. The French Colonial Empire had several phases, which together lasted for 446 years. At first it wasn't so big, ruling bits of Middle Africa and the western half of North America. Britain conquered and bought its American territories. Then a little thing called the French Revolution disrupted France's imperial ambitions. Out of this, Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power, calling himself emperor and literally conquering Europe. He ruled Spain, Italy, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, Norway, and the Austrian Empire. He got so powerful that he invaded Russia. He nearly succeeded too, but he wasn't prepared for the Russian winter and was pushed back. No one was ever stupid enough to try that again. Hitler. Though Napoleon was eventually defeated, the French Empire never went away and reformed with a vengeance. It expanded to rule nearly all of North Africa and parts of Asia, lording over 110 million people, or 5% of the world's population. The empire more or less ended with World War II. Most of its colonies won independence in the 1960s. Today, 28 countries speak French as a main language, and the legacy of the empire guarantees France a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Number 6. The Russian Empire, 1721 to 1917 CE. Russia began as a collection of Slavic tribes in Eastern Europe and what is now Western Russia. These lands were huge, but had a population of just 15 million people. Hardly anyone lived in towns, and the country never really bothered with an industrial revolution. Their borders shifted a lot between being independent or ruled by the Mongols or Europeans. As their neighbours declined in power, the Russian Empire formed and expanded greatly under Ivan the Great and Peter the Great. The Tsars used a strategy of Russification to absorb other countries. That is, they'd replace the politics and language of conquered people with Russian ones. The empire became the third largest in history, covering 15% of the world. It stretched over 3 continents and 1/10 of humanity. In the 19th century, it spanned all the land from the Black Sea to the Arctic Ocean, the Baltic Sea to the Pacific Ocean, and included Alaska. The empire lasted 196 years, but was always economically fragile. The First World War ruined it. The 1917 revolution deposed its monarchy and led to a civil war and, ultimately, the creation of the Soviet Union. Number 5. Umayyad Caliphate, 661 to 750 CE. In its heyday, the Umayyad Caliphate ruled nearly 1/3 of the world's population and owned 7.5% of the land. It arose from the empire established by the Prophet Muhammad. His successors as leaders of the Muslim people take the title Caliph, hence the name Caliphate. The Umayyad dynasty became caliphs 30 years after Muhammad's death. Although Islamic in origin, the Caliphate ruled over many people of different ethnicities and religions. The Umayyads very rapidly extended their rule from Mecca to Pakistan in the east and the Iberian Peninsula in the west. It was the largest empire the world had ever seen. It would have conquered further, but the Umayyad dynasty wasn't popular everywhere in its own territory. The Umayyad caliphs were overthrown after 89 years. The Caliphate endured, but subsequent dynasties failed to continue the Umayyads' remarkable military conquests. Number 4. The Mongol Empire, 1206 to 1368 CE. You've all heard of Genghis Khan. He formed the largest contiguous land empire in history. It covered 22% of the Earth's land area, from China to Europe. The Mongols almost conquered Japan too, but seafaring was never their strong suit. Instead, their genius lay in their nomadic culture. They moved their cattle with their armies, living in giant camps instead of cities. This meant they could keep spreading the borders of the empire without overstretching their supply lines. Eventually, the Mongols ruled 110 million people, a quarter of the world's population. They would have ruled even more if they weren't so bloodthirsty. Genghis Khan alone is estimated to be responsible for the deaths of 40 million people. The hundreds of babies he fathered didn't quite make up for it. However, while they were great conquerors, the Mongols weren't great administrators. The empire lasted 162 years before splitting into 4 parts. One of these, led by Genghis Khan's grandson, started the Yuan dynasty, which ruled all of what is now modern China. Number 3. The Roman Empire, 27 BC to 1453 CE. Julius Caesar wasn't technically an emperor, but he ruled like one. So, if you include his republic, the Roman Empire lasted over 1,480 years. That's because even when the empire split up in the 5th century, it remained as the Byzantine Empire in Eastern Europe until 1453. At their most powerful, the Romans ruled nearly a quarter of the known world. They maintained stability through a clever carrot and stick approach. On the one hand, they had the most effective and best armed military in ancient history. On the other hand, they introduced massive technological advancements to their conquered peoples. They also always offered the most prestigious and luxurious reward of all, becoming a fully fledged Roman citizen and one of the people in charge. Unfortunately for Rome, most of what it brought the world was forgotten when the empire withdrew. It simply got too big, and civil wars and barbarian hordes combined to bring about its decline. Nevertheless, its cultural influence was huge. Christianity spread throughout the Western world thanks to the empire, and the Catholic Church adopted its organization and language. Number 2. Persian Empire, 550 to 330 BC. The Persian Empire dominated the Middle East and kept peace there for 220 years from its base in Iran. It ruled 50 million people. That might not sound like much, but that's 44% of all humans alive at the time. The Persians conquered Egypt, parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and almost all of Greece. Athens and Sparta famously resisted Persian conquest, but still adopted a lot of Persian customs and culture. For the record, the Persians never thought their campaign against Athens was a failure. The Persian Empire would have continued for a lot longer if the death of its last emperor, Darius III, hadn't coincided with the arrival of a certain Alexander the Great. Alexander named himself as Darius' heir and took most of the Eastern Persian Empire, adding it to his Macedonian kingdom. He forced the Persians to retreat to Iran. Alexander never quite conquered all of the Persian lands though, and his own empire fell apart when he died at the tender age of 32. Number 1. The British Empire, 1603 to 1997 CE. Easily the largest empire in history, Britain ruled 30% of the Earth and a quarter of the world's population, over 500 million people. And that's after the American colonies became independent, although they inherited their language, national beliefs and trade philosophies from Mother Britain, which they in turn spread across the modern world. The overall influence of the British Empire shouldn't be underestimated. It introduced representative democracy to most of the world and established English as the dominant language. Not everything was rosy in the empire though. The British oversaw a number of atrocities. Across the years and nations, literally millions of people died from famines, in concentration camps or in massacres, mostly because they dared to stand up to their white masters. It lasted 394 years before going the way of most European empires in the 20th century. Officially, it ended in 1997 when Hong Kong was returned to the Chinese. Even then, the empire arguably still lives on in the form of the Commonwealth. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out this one that's playing on screen now. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And stretched right up to the latter half of the 20th century. At its peak in the early 1920s, it controlled 23% of the world's surface and 458 million people. Its power and influence were hugely impressive,